Hello, and welcome everyone to Disability N's exclusive webinar, Meeting the Financial Needs of People with Disabilities, hosted by Experian. My name is Keisha Philippe with Disability N, and on today's webinar, you will hear a conversation between Disability N corporate partner peers. Lisa Catino, 2021 NextGen Leaders Council member and alumnus at Disability N. Thomas Foley, Executive Director at National Disability Institute. Our moderator for today's webinar will be Veronica Herrera, Director, Product Solutions and Credit Ambassador at Experian. Now, before I turn it over to our panel, for anyone who cannot see the screen or who has dialed in, I will be running through a PowerPoint slide regarding webinar housekeeping items. As an attendee, you are in view-only mode, meaning you may watch the presentation and participate in a moderated Q&A. You cannot share audio or video. So please feel free to submit your questions for our panel in the Q&A box anytime during the conversation. They will do their best to address all questions either throughout or at the end of the webinar. This webinar, as with all webinars in the Disability in Webinar series, is being recorded. You may access all webinar recordings in our corporate partner portal, or in this case, in our library, our public library. ASL and live captioning are both being provided during today's webinar. To start viewing the captioning, simply select the CC or closed caption icon in the meeting controls. Feel free to click and drag the closed captioning box to move its position in the meeting window. We will also post a stream text link in the chat box. Our ASL interpreter video will be spotlighted for the duration of the webinar. If you need any assistance during the webinar, please feel free to reach out to me directly through the Q&A or chat box or via email at nikisha@disabilityn.org. I will now take down my housekeeping slide and hand it over to Veronica.
Thank you, Keisha. Thanks so much for everyone for being here. My name is Veronica Herrera. I'm a Director of Product at Experian. I specialize in credit scores and attributes. I use she and her pronouns. I am a Hispanic woman with short dark hair, and today I'm wearing a black and white striped sweater, and I'm here in my home office in Southern California. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Lisa Catino and Tom Foley about the important topic of meeting the financial needs of people with disabilities. Lisa, can you start us off with a quick intro today?
Hello, I'm very honored to be here today with all of you. And my name is Lisa Catino. I'm a person with autism. I've been actively engaged with the Disability In since 2017 as a NextGen leader, mentee, and continue to serve as a part of the Alumni Council. I use she, her, ella as pronouns. I am a chameleon of a woman whose skin and color has been transformed by vitiligo. I currently have long platinum blonde hair with bangs. I'm wearing a black sweater with a Disability In pin. I'm currently located in Maryland inside my newly bought it on my own, home sweet home.
Thank you, Lisa. Tom, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely, thank you. And thank you to Disability In and Experian for the opportunity. Hey everyone, my name is Thomas Foley. I'm the Executive Director of the National Disability Institute. We're a shop here in the Washington, D.C. area, and we work exclusively on issues of economic inclusion and economic empowerment for folks with disabilities. I am a white male, short brown hair, about 50 years old, don't tell anyone, wearing a dark suit with a light blue shirt and a tie, and my pronouns are he, him, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today.
Awesome, thank you so much. So I've worked for Experian for about, 20 years this year, actually. And I have to tell you that my favorite part of the job is the fact that I'm a credit ambassador, and I go out into the community and I use my experience with credit and understanding credit scores to educate the community at large about how to establish credit, how to use credit, and all that. Financial inclusion is very important to Experian, and that has to include the disability community. While we were preparing for this event, we did a little bit of research into some statistics, and I wanted to just kick us off a little bit with some things that we found. And Tom, I'll hand it over to you to kind of expound on that. But what I found was really disheartening that Americans with disabilities have less access to credit than those without disabilities. And we're talking about things like having less access to things like credit cards, or not having as many auto loans and mortgage. The typical things that most people would have. Additionally, people with disabilities are 3 times as likely to be unbanked than people without disabilities. And whereas, more than 76% of non-disabled households will use traditional bank credit, less than 50% of working adult disabled households do. And those statistics are very disheartening. Tom, I know you've done more research on this subject. What kind of information can you share with us today?
Sure. So, like you said, people with disabilities have lower economic outcomes than their non-disabled peers, and particularly at the intersection of race and disability. So let me just hit you with a couple of statistics around that. So why don't we start with net worth? So, what someone's worth. So according to research we did last year, the average household income for a family of 4 in the United States, a non-disabled family of 4, is about $84,000, $85,000. When we look at net worth for a household where there's a disabled householder, that number drops all the way to $14,400. So that's nearly a 6.5 time difference. But when we look at the intersection of race and disability, so if in that same household, if it's a person who is Black and has a disability, that group's net worth is $1,282. So clearly, a lot of work needs to be done, not only around disability, but also at that intersection of race and disability. A couple more statistics. So when we look at income distribution, the lowest quartile is from $0 to $15,000. People with disabilities are more than 3 times overrepresented in that quartile of income. And when we look at $15,000 to $30,000, they're almost twice as likely to be in that quartile as well. So clearly, that income disparity really contributes to the net worth piece as well. But we're here to talk about credit, and you mentioned some statistics earlier, and I just want to circle back to them because it's so important. So according to that same some FDIC data sets that we crunched, folks with disabilities are 1.7 times less likely to get access to the credit that they're looking for. And sometimes that means they were turned down. Sometimes that means they didn't apply because they didn't have a chance. And sometimes, it means that, they weren't even aware they could apply for that credit. But, when we talk about access to credit, this is a fundamental building block of being able to build, a financial future for oneself and one's family. You mentioned bank accounts, and obviously everyone knows, bank accounts are critically important to being able to build a financial future. But, credit is just as, if not, more important. These days, if you want to get a cell phone plan, you need to have a credit score, your first apartment, a loan for an accessible van, a loan perhaps, to buy your first house. And so we're really excited to be working with Experian and Disability to talk more about credit and how it can make such a difference in building a financial future for folks with disabilities.
Yeah, you mentioned something about, people with disabilities might actually have higher needs, right? More financial needs, and they're precisely the ones that have, lower access, lower income. We did get a question that came in regarding the income. I'm wondering if you could answer it. The question came in: could income be lower because of Medicaid and Medicare needs?
That's a great question. So the Medicare and Medicaid needs. And I forgot to mention this, there's a link, if we could put that into the chat, to all the data that I just talked about on our National Disability Institute webpage. But yeah, Medicare and Medicaid needs, certainly, that's a huge expense for a lot of people. And particularly for folks, who are on benefits, there are some artificial asset limits that are put in place. But, to your earlier point, one of the things we know absolutely for sure is that it's expensive to have a disability, right? And we did a study last year with some partners that really dug into some of that data to see how expensive. So just as what it came out to is almost 17% people with disabilities need almost a 17% more income, $17,000 more income to be at the same sort of rate as people without disabilities. So if we take a step back and think about this, so having a disability is expensive. A wheelchair accessible van can be $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. If we need to put a ramp into a house, construction fees to make a house more accessible, can range anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000, $60,000. Choosing to live closer to work to make sure that a commute is more reasonable for someone with a disability enters into that equation as well. Accessible software. I'm a blind person, and so I have what you hear in the background is my screen reading software, which is not free. Service dogs. There's all sorts of expenses associated with having a disability. That people with disabilities need to be able to pay, every day just to live the same lives as other people. And that's just, yet another reason that credit is so important. Certainly no one is probably going out and paying $50,000, $60,000 in cash for that accessible van. So being able to, make sure that one has a credit score, that you have access to credit, can make a huge difference in the interest rate and the affordability of things that people need day to day. And I have another link that we could put into the chat that links to that study as well. But again, appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Awesome, thank you. Lisa, we imagine that you probably can relate to some of the points that Tom has been sharing, but and before this event, we got a chance to learn a little bit about you and your situation, particularly about your journey to becoming a homeowner. Congratulations, by the way. We'd like to hear your story. We'd like to hear how this big money moment of yours was impacted financially as a person with a disability. What was your experience?
Well, I can confer as a person with a disability, the data points that Tom just mentioned, they all tell a story. So while my story doesn't encompass the lived experience of all persons with disabilities, there are some many shared characteristics. So when I'm looking at college, for example, that's expensive, right? Just as expensive as getting that credit score. But it's more expensive for a person with a disability. I have over 14 years of college education. That's not because I'm an overachiever or I'm pedantic, but it's because I would not give up. I have numerous stories of teachers, schools, and employers where requests for accommodations were delayed or never implemented. And I absorbed those costs. When I failed a class or lost a semester or missed days of work due to my disability, I absorbed those costs. So when you're looking at establishing credit and making these larger purchases, it's about tackling hundreds of thousands of financial obstacles and hurdles. It's important that we talk about some these high dollar items that impact people with disabilities in greater quantities. I feel that my story is one of endless optimism and resilience. I've learned to be patient with my goals and to recreate my dreams so that they match my condition. I won't reveal my age, but I'm older than most of my peers buying their first home. And I would say that this is the direct result of having to overcome stigmas and systematic failures that fail to account for the unique needs of persons with disabilities. In schools, in higher education, in the workplace, in commercial business, and nearly everywhere we look.
That is, yeah, tell me a little bit about some of the support or tools that you would have, would have been helpful to you that you didn't have, some things that you really would have made a difference to you. The process.
Well, to be honest, some of the issues I'm challenged by are social, pragmatic, and conversational skills. Those are necessary to build and maintain relationships. Mm-hmm. Many people don't realize how impactful this can be while building financial health. Yet there are millions of different people that are looking to establish healthy credit and move towards financial wellness. Mm-hmm. This means that we have to consider an infinite variation in how people learn and interact with content. It's important not to just build a one-size-fits-all model, but to take the approach of universal design for learning, where learning about financial wellness has many touch points, offering a personalized experience and while building data. Now, my younger self I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please, I was just reacting. Go ahead, continue.
My younger self understood the archetype of navigating the credit process with a partner, with your parents, or with a family member. So what if navigating this process as a single disabled woman earning less than my peers and working more than one job? So what if it was lonely? There are many people that will pay for their education, that will purchase a car, that will start a business and build their credit alone. So I'd say that although I was able to educate myself, I think it would be amazing if I felt supported and encouraged, if I didn't feel lonely. So my thought is that if we build services that provide each person with an ability to find, measure, interact, and feel included in the credit process, we will see increased access for all.
That is a very, very good point. We all need to be supported. We all need to feel that, we have someone who has our back, and, feeling lonely through this process. I remember when I got my first house, it was not an easy process by any means. But yeah, feeling lonely through that whole process can be pretty devastating. Tom, I want to bring you back. Tell me a little bit about, what do you think are some of the drivers of these challenges that people with disabilities face? Why is it so hard for individuals with disabilities specifically to get access to credit?
Sure. Well, I think Lisa did a great job of outlining a number of them. So I think there's expectation and stigma, and I think Lisa spoke really eloquently to that. And also the accessibility and the relatability of educational materials, right? So, certainly everyone could benefit from not only financial education, but financial coaching, and that would include, a lot of information about credit and how to build credit and the importance of credit, and, how it can lead to things being more affordable. So, I think there traditionally hasn't been a lot of access to that within the disability community. But, in addition to that, Lisa also touched on two things that I thought were really, really important. One is, Lisa, you made reference to, your story is one of optimism and resilience. And I think those are, two huge words that really encapsulate what it has taken within the disability community to really be economically successful. But, one of the things we talked about in one of the rehearsals, and I remember years ago that doing a financial education class, and someone came up to me afterwards and said, you know, as a single woman with a disability, it never occurred to me that I could own my own home. And, you know, Lisa, when we were talking in one of the practice sessions, you know, that really resonated for me because it sounded very similar to your experience. But one of the things that Lisa gets to do now, you know, as a single person with a disability who bought her own home, is get to be a role model and not only help, you know, colleagues and peers and, you know, other people who are watching, you know, understand, you know, that people with disabilities want the same things as everyone else, right? We want a job, we want a career, we want a home of our own, we want the American dream. And not only that, but, you know, one of the things is that you've shown that, you know, people with disabilities can do it. So I think that role model effect, you know, is really a powerful piece of, you know, financial inclusion and demonstrating to other people with disabilities that, you know, home ownership, you know, is for everybody, including folks with disabilities.
That's very important. In fact, Lisa, I'd like to go back a little bit more to your story. I'd love to hear, you know, so what were some of the strategies that you used? I mean, you accomplished something that's amazing, but by anybody's standard, but even, you know, perhaps even more so from your standards. So tell me, specific to that home buying experience, what are some of the things that you had to face and the things that you kind of did to overcome them?
Yes. So you know, there have been many challenges, and I think that some of the things that were really difficult for me to overcome were the expenses related to being a disabled woman and the low wages I earned. And so I continually had more than one job, even while I was going through school. So that was really important to me. And then, of course, you know, unfortunately, I've been unemployed many times and let go of. And that's led to great financial difficulty, where I was placed in a position to pay for housing, which is my second largest cost, but it's my primary need. And so, you know, I lived in squander. I starved, I didn't eat, you know, I lived where I could afford.
Wow. I am so sorry to hear that you had to experience that. When you were going through the credit process, did you also feel like you had either less information, less knowledge, or less access to traditional credit vehicles that you know an average consumer would have?
Well, I think, as you can see by my my college degrees, I am knowledge thirsty, and so so I definitely did seek out learning about my credit and how I could build that. And then, you know, I reached out to a family member and I asked him for a referral, and then I got some help from different people along the way. Working with a credit agency who helped me to rebuild my credit from any delinquent accounts or anything like that. So I had to wait for that whole process and go through that when I was really determined. But I started saving for this house, gosh, since I was in college. I always really wanted to be independent and financially independent. I think there's a big fear of homelessness that lives inside me. So I think that some of the ways that I learned was just by going to those websites, by asking some people, by doing a lot of reading. Right now, there are more available resources, but I still feel like there's something missing. And I still feel like my friends, my peers, those who will come after me as persons with disabilities, that those people might not look for the help. They might not do it on their own. They might be infantilized by credit brokers, by mortgage lenders, by people that talk down to them. We often see these biases in interactions, and that permeates the whole process.
Absolutely. And by the way, I couldn't agree with you more that, in general, there's little credit education out there. I mean, it isn't even taught in schools. It's one of my biggest gripes, and one of the reasons why I go out into the community and help try to explain this to pretty much anyone who will listen. Because there is information out there. Here at Experian, we have many resources available for anyone who wants to learn more about credit, how to establish it, how to maintain it, and all that. So I do agree with you that we are lacking in that information. Just as a society, we need to know more about it. So kudos to you for going out there and finding all this this information out. And I want to thank you both for the insight that you've given me. I'll tell you, I have learned quite a bit. I've been in financial literacy for over a decade, and I have learned so many things just being a part of this webinar. So I do want to thank you for this. And I want to pivot a little bit now towards solutions. So we've talked about the challenges. We've talked a little bit about some of the drivers that lead to those challenges. Tom, I know that you have done some research in this area. What can you share? Information that financial organizations can do to help, kind of bridge that wealth gap?
Sure. So, a number of things. So the first one is things like this, right? Like this partnership with Disability In and Experian, where we're talking about this, to a large group of people. We're highlighting this issue. This is what inclusion looks like when it's done intentionally. Right. So, it's basically, recognizing, based on the data that people with disabilities have been left out of this, that people with disabilities, just like everybody else, want to have that cell phone plan, that accessible vehicle, their home, and then being proactive about building partnerships and relationships to get that financial education, to get that financial coaching, to get that credit education out to the community. We're lucky enough at National Disability Institute to also be partnering with Experian. We have a website called the Financial Resilience Center. And, we stood it up just as COVID-19 started up. And I'm always reminded it's called COVID-19 because it started actually in 2019, which seems like such a long time ago. But we realized that, there would be a lot of people, particularly people with disabilities, who were going to go through really difficult financial times. So we set up this website, and Experian has just been a terrific partner to really be able to bring this credit education, to our Financial Resilience Center. And be able to really, again, intentionally focus on including people with disabilities in the people that you outreach to. There's doing that kind of intentionality and that kind of outreach through trusted partners, who speak to the community, is a tremendous way to, really start to hopefully change some of those statistics that we started the conversation about.
And what do you think financial institutions, banks, credit unions, other lenders, what can they do purposefully to help help, deal with the additional challenges that people with disabilities face?
Well, Lisa hit on a great point earlier in the conversation. Making sure that materials, financial education materials, credit materials are all accessible to folks with disabilities. And again, I've had an opportunity to work with Experian on this. where, all the educational materials, all the outreach is digitally accessible to folks like me who are blind. Again, I use a screen reader, and so that makes getting information and, more importantly, acting on that information, more complicated. But when organizations, make a commitment to accessibility and a commitment to digital inclusion, that goes a long way to really making sure that, folks with disabilities will gain the benefit of that information as well. And then, again, what we're really talking about are removing barriers. Some of those might be attitudinal barriers. Some of those might be accessibility barriers. Some of those might be, expectation barriers. But, financial institutions, I think, now so more than ever, are doing a much better job of realizing that, people with disabilities, again, are like everybody else. We buy cars, we buy homes, we want to put our kids through college. So I think part of that too is recognizing, hey, people with disabilities are a traditionally underserved market.
Yeah.
These are folks who need credit cards. These are folks who need student loans. These are folks who need mortgages and are going to build, a financial future, for themselves and their family. And, not only that, but, I've experienced in my own life, when I get really good customer service, particularly around disability from some organization, I'm going to go back to that organization with more business. So if it was easy to get credit education from you, I'm going to come back and do more work with you. Maybe that's a credit card. Maybe that's a loan to put my son through college. Maybe that's a mortgage. But, recognizing that disability is a market is a key component of this as well.
It really is. No, absolutely. And just, you said just relative, some just simple things that help to bring down some of those barriers would go quite a long way. But yes, making things accessible to everyone, whether it's audiovisual, just additional patience, right? Understanding that sometimes things take a little bit longer. Lisa, you brought up a wonderful point of some attitudinal changes that people need to have, right? To not talk down to people with a disability, to treat them like they would treat any viable consumer. It's really what we're talking here, is that people with disabilities are viable consumers. They deserve the same respect, the same offerings as anyone else. If they need a little more accommodation, that's fine. That's not going to be something that needs to exclude them. So I think that is a very important point to make. Lisa, have you? By the way, there was a question that came in, and I think it was directed to you, Lisa. The question is, has the greatest barrier to achievement in getting ahead, has it been do you consider it to be the difficulty in getting credit, or has it been more about the difficulty in getting a high paid job?
Oh, it's not just about the difficulty of getting a high paid job.
Okay.
It's about getting a job and leaving a job, or finding, finding jobs. I'm an educator, and I have just been really underpaid, working kind of for my passion area. I work a lot with underserved populations, Hispanic populations. I lived in South America for 1 year, where I was a volunteer in a school for individuals with disabilities, and I was a pioneer in that. And I think that I feel that I think that one of the hardest challenges was being able to communicate my needs, being able to initiate conversation, not being afraid to ask for accommodations, learning to advocate for myself. It's a really big growth process. I started very long time ago advocating for myself when schools weren't advocating for me anymore. So it's a growth process, and you need to learn that advocacy that isn't angry, because I think, unfortunately, some of us have a little bit of a chip on our shoulder. And I know that oftentimes people don't explore that with what Kate Holmes terms like empathy, right? I don't know if you've read the book Mismatch by Kate Holmes, but if you haven't, I would encourage you to read it. And she talks about empathy, and she provides 2 Mandarin definitions of empathy. And one definition or one meaning is to reason with the heart. And the second is to sense the total situation. So when somebody cannot sense the total situation, they cannot fix the total situation. You have to find the problem to fix it. And we're so vast. So I think it's really important that you don't just look at one person with a disability and ask for their feedback, but to take a multitude, a diverse approach to including all people and not just persons with disabilities. And so, sorry, and so Tom had touched on that, and I think that's a very important part, is that I am a person with autism. You don't look like a person with autism, but I am. And when I'm not included, then maybe I'm not represented. So I think it's really just important to talk about being a part of that stakeholder group, developing a strong sample of individuals that don't just represent one population of people with disabilities.
Absolutely. Tom, what difference do you think it would make in the lives of people with disabilities to have this inclusion, to have financial institutions, different institutions actively try to include and to facilitate credit for people with disabilities? How big of an impact would you think that would have?
Oh, I think it would be enormous. And there's a couple pieces to that, right? So let's just think about that. Let's think about the 18-year-old kid who's starting out on their own, and having access to the education and tools to build credit. They'll get a less expensive self-fund plan, right? They might get their first apartment. I remember years ago, I was doing some research with a big bank, and we were looking at the sort of apps that young people with disabilities used. And a number of them used this one credit app. And we said, hey, why? And they said, oh, we discovered if we want to move out from home, we have to have a credit score. And basically what they were saying is, if you don't want a curfew, you need a credit score. And so, but just think about how important that is, getting your first apartment with your friends at, 18 or at college age or whatever. So, it's huge, and it leads to all sorts of other, growth opportunities. But the savings over time is dramatic as well. I talked earlier about putting kids through college, and I joked about this with you guys. I've put 2.5 kids through college so far. And, the difference between the interest rate on those loans for somebody with good credit and with bad, there was a 4.5 point interest rate range, about 10 years ago when my first kid started college. And that just made a huge difference in how, in the payment, in the total amount owed. But, that stands true also for mortgages, like with Lisa. And what we know, particularly around mortgages, is you buy your first house. I think the last statistic that I saw was that something like 40% of net worth in the United States was based on home ownership. So, the ability to build one's credit over time, have the accessible tools and education to continue learning, because I keep learning, every year how to do it a little bit better, makes a long-term and short-term financial difference for people with disabilities and their families.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. I'll tell you, one of the things that I do is I work with lenders to establish criteria, things along those lines. And people often ask me, what's worse, having bad credit or no credit? Well, I'll tell you that bad credit, just like you were saying, Tom, leads to higher interest rates. It means you have to pay more in security deposits, even renting an apartment or things like that. So bad credit is never a good thing to have. But I'll tell you something else, that having no credit, when you are, fearful of even initiating credit or jumping into it, that generally leads to complete declining of not even being offered the loan at a higher interest rate, but flat out being declined. And I think that there is fear, generally speaking, among youth. I talk to young people all the time, and I hear this, oh, I don't want to get in debt. And while I agree, you shouldn't get into debt, it's important to distinguish that debt and credit are not the same thing. They can be related. You can get into debt using credit, that is true, but they are not the same thing. Building credit is like building your financial references. The earlier you start, the better, right? And it is a shame that sometimes, especially younger population, younger groups, sometimes the first thing on their credit report is a collection agency reporting something, because they haven't actually built that credit. And I think it is important for everyone. But in particular, if an individual who has a disability, and it makes this a little bit harder, they need even more understanding of what it is. I know that many people with disabilities are actually afraid of even applying. Right. I was reading a statistic where they don't even start the process for fear of being rejected, for perhaps not understanding the process, or just the general understanding that they're not going to get it anyway. So why try? And that in the long run hurts, because credit, like anything, it takes time to build. You do not build your credit history overnight. And quite frankly, one of the things that I do is I do a lot of these analytics. And if you have less than 10 years of experience in credit, you're kind of considered on the new side. So, it's not something that you can do overnight. It's something that you have to start early. We need to educate youth. We need to educate different people that are afraid of getting into credit, that, they need to start. At some point, they need to start. So I do agree with everything that you're saying. And I think those are terrific suggestions. I'm going to take a look and see if we've got quite a few questions in the inbox, and I know I have to. Oh, go ahead, Lisa, please.
I just wanted to circle back to the question that was asked about what was like getting a high-paying job. I think that one of the challenges I had in keeping my jobs are directly related to my disability. I don't just have one disability. I have several disabilities, but my most limiting disability is my autism. And so it does impact me, but my other health conditions also impact me. I have had 11 knee surgeries. I am constantly in and out of the hospital. I see doctors for other conditions, right? And that requires me to have time off, or to, leave early, or just not be there. And that absence is oftentimes profoundly felt, especially when you're working in the field of education. And I realized that pretty early on, education wasn't suited for me because I'm not always able to show up. And so I think that, I had to recreate myself. And that was the biggest barrier, was every time I was denied accommodations, every time I was denied access, I was placed in those situations. I'm sorry. Every time I was denied access, I forgot my words. Sorry.
Take your time. Take your time. We have plenty of time.
But I feel that every one of those setbacks, just not really being able to be there, they set me back, and I don't know who to blame for it. I'm not accusing anyone. I'm not pointing fingers. I'm saying my disability was my greatest barrier, and that's because people didn't understand my disability.
Yeah.
People still don't understand my disability. I don't understand a lot of people's disabilities, but I don't understand anyone, period, everyone, period, right? So I think it's really, it's just that. I don't.
Well, I'll tell you, we've gotten some comments and most of them are around, Lisa, you're amazing. So everyone here is so grateful that you're willing to share this. And we know this is difficult. We know that, in many cases, the situations that you've had to go through were painful, difficult. We do have a couple of questions. One from a fellow teacher who's asked, how have you gone about advocating for yourself to get accommodations in your work, in your job specifically? How do you do that with the administration, for example?
I think every employer is different. And so I have to be upfront because I know that my disability is a limiting factor to my job retention or promotion or anything, right? I know that my disability is a limiting factor. And so I work with my doctors, or most recently with the Department of Rehabilitation Services, to provide my employer with the accommodation papers to disclose that I am an individual with a disability, and to ask for those things. It's not always easy, and it oftentimes doesn't happen at all. So I've seen that in schools, right? Where I had a teacher, just one teacher, who wouldn't accept the accommodations. And so I failed her class. I had A's in every other course, but a failure. So I think that those, that's really advocating for yourself. Looks like talking to those people who have made the recommendations for your accommodations, talking to those professionals who understand the workforce better than I do because they've been doing it for years, and this is my first lifetime. So I think that that's really what needs to happen.
That's very inspiring. I've got to tell you that listening to your stories, and we're getting comments left and right about how inspiring this all is. It really is eye-opening to me and to many people in the audience of what you've gone through, what people, with disabilities in general go through on a day-to-day basis in every aspect of your life. So, we do truly appreciate the fact that you're coming forward and letting us, all of us know and experience a little bit about what you went through. We still have a little time left, but I want to make sure that both Lisa and Tom get a chance to, give us some takeaways, some closing remarks, things that you want to make sure that this audience takes away today. Tom, why don't you start?
Oh, thanks. Well, first, I want to thank Disability In and Experian for the opportunity to be here and for surfacing this issue, right? I mean, here's the thing about disability inclusion, particularly on the financial side of the house. It's only going to happen if we do it intentionally. And we do that through events like this, and through partnerships, and through continuing to have these conversations and have difficult conversations. But I really want to thank Lisa for everything you've said today and for your bravery to be here. And man, congratulations on buying your first house. That is absolutely amazing. And I hope you take a great deal of pride in that. I really look forward to working with all of you with Disability In, with Experian, to removing these barriers to financial inclusion. Because, you know, what we want to get to is a place where people's economic success is tied to their ambition, their talent, and their passion. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you. Lisa, what are some of the main takeaways you'd like this audience to kind of go think about?
Well, I am totally, I'm really a heartfelt thank you to all of you who have attended and participated and listened to my story. I want to reiterate something I said earlier, and that was that it's important not to build a one-size-fits-all model. And that's true for people with autism too. You don't want to build for one autistic person. And that's why that sample size is so big. So we really, I think that taking the approach of universal design about financial wellness, that having as many touch points as you can have by offering people a more personalized experience, because it's not just numbers, there's people. And I think building data that will help companies continue to be smarter. Those are some of the things that I hope that you take with you and think about. I have the sense that there are some brilliant minds, and I would love to work with you. So thank you very much.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you both so much. We do hope, I want to thank everyone in the audience as well. I hope that this conversation has enlightened you. I hope that you've learned something new, that you have some ideas, new kind of thought starters, so that we can all work towards being part of the solution, right? In general about financial literacy, and specifically about financial inclusion for people with disabilities. Thank you all for attending today. Keisha, can I hand it back to you to close us out? I do know that we have quite a few questions that hopefully we'll be able to answer directly. We weren't able to get to everything. Thank you so much for participating. But we'll see about getting those answers back to individuals.
Thank you so much, Veronica. And thank you to our presenters, Lisa, Thomas, as well as Veronica, for sharing your expertise and best practices. We much appreciate your time and willingness to be on our webinar panel today. A special thanks to our ASL interpreter and our captioner. And a big thank you to our audience for joining us today. I've put up one last PowerPoint slide that displays details of our next webinar. Please join us on February 2nd for a webinar titled Intersectionality of Race and Disability. Please visit the Disability In Partner Portal for the complete webinar schedule and registration links. Again, thank you all for joining and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.